Another quick tie. Your next fly starts here.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Quick Tie. My name is Tim Hepworth, here with Fly Fishing Bover Outfitters and Thursday Night Live Fly Tying. Tonight we're going to be tying up the Kate McLaren Wet Fly. This is a timeless classic wet fly originally tied in Scotland for loch fishing, but now is a staple worldwide. This fly's versatility and history make it a favorite for anglers everywhere now. We're excited to show you this pattern and go through a few things. We have a few other things to talk about here. I want you first to like and subscribe. If you're in here, drop a comment, let us know where you found us from, and if you enjoyed tying up this pattern with me tonight. We also want to thank Western Canada Fly Fishing Guide School for sponsoring this quick tie tonight. You can see the website below me here. If you'd like any further information on it, don't hesitate to reach out, give us a call, head on over to that website, look through the program and see what it's all about. You can see the dates that we're running it. This year, we do one class a year, and this year it's gonna be May 5th to 10th. So if you have any interest in that, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll give you some more information about that event. All right, let's talk a little bit more about this fly. We'll get into tying it. We're gonna be tying out of tonight my season 7 Thursday Night Live fly tying kit. If you're tying out of this kit with us tonight, go ahead, find your episode 2. It's gonna look something just like this. You're gonna have a couple of patterns in there. We're gonna be pulling out first this Kate McLaren Wet Fly. If you also are tying out of our individual kits that you've purchased from us, everything's gonna be exactly the same materials. Packaging might look a little different, but it's gonna be the same fly. If you aren't tying out of one of our kits tonight, don't worry about it at all. If you head over to our website, we have a full fly recipe for this fly, and it'll give you everything you need to know as we move into tying this pattern. We're not gonna need a lot tonight other than the materials in your kit. You're gonna need a bobbin and some scissors, and that's pretty much gonna do it for you. Maybe some hackle pliers to help you with wrapping the hackle. All right, well, let's head over to the vise and take a look at this fly. This is what we're tying up tonight. So this is a wet fly. So if you know much about a wet fly, these are normally fish subsurface, as it's called. It's wet, it's not a dry fly. This one has a lot of imitations. It could be imitating emerging insects or small bait fish, and that's what makes it incredibly effective in rivers and in still water. So this is a timeless classic, and we're excited to share it with you tonight. So I'm gonna start by going ahead and getting my fly out of my vise. I'm gonna set that aside, and I'm gonna get my next hook in the vise. So we are tying this probably on the smaller side of what this pattern could be tied. This is a size 12, or no, this one's a 14 hook tonight. So it's a little bit smaller, but don't worry, we have lots of room in this hook to get this thing tied up. Make sure your hook is good and stable in that vise before you start tying. This evening, I'm gonna be tying with some black UTC, and this is gonna be in 70 denier. Want it a little bit smaller, don't wanna be accumulating too many thread wraps with thicker thread right off the bat on this fly. So how we're gonna start this, we're gonna come in, I'm gonna leave about an eye length behind the eye. I'm gonna start wrapping my thread rearward. As I get a few layers laid down, I'm gonna come in here and snip out my thread. Now, it is important that we leave a little bit of space up here because it is easy to get all these materials jammed right up against that eye. And if you're anything like me, at times we congregate things in the front, we run out of room to whip finish or to half hitch, and it can be a really frustrating experience. And that's right when you're at the pinnacle, when you're trying to finish this fly and you run out of space. From here, we're gonna take our thread wraps back all the way to the edge of the hook bend, but we don't wanna tip over the hook bend. So on this specific hook, when I leave my bobbin hanging down, it's gonna come just about to where that barb is sitting on that hook. It's a good gauge for you there. And the first material we're gonna tie in here is this yellow feather you can see right here. This comes off a golden pheasant neck. You can see it's got a little bit of a curve to it, okay? We're gonna try to maintain that curve, although it's not super important on this pattern. In theory, we'd like it to be a little curved up at the back end, but by the time we tie it down, since we're only using the very back end of it, a lot of times the other materials kind of push it down. It ends up coming straight off the back of the hook shank, which is just fine as well. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna not be super worried about the length right away. I'm just gonna get the materials laid down. We're gonna do a couple of wraps, then we can pull it back into position. So I'm gonna start by pinching it with my opposite hand, take my bobbin hand, get a gathering wrap on that material. We do want that material to stay right up on top of the hook shank. So I'm gonna take my hands off it for a second, look at it from on top, make sure that it is sitting on top of the hook shank, which you want it to be just like that. Now I'm gonna take and I'm gonna pull on this guy back. And I want this to be roughly, the very tips to be about a full hook shank in length out the back. Remembering, this isn't a dry fly, this isn't a nymph, it's being fished as a wet fly. So whether that's stripped or swung in the current, so we want this tail to actually be visible. And with all the other hackle that's gonna go on here, it can get trapped if we don't leave it just long enough. So I'm gonna leave it right about there. There's about that full hook shank and length out the back. I'm gonna take a couple more wraps rearward, and I'm gonna snip this out. I'm gonna leave a little bit of extra length here so that it basically ends right where my thread started. But before I get there, I do wanna drive a couple of wraps up underneath and behind. So I'm just coming in behind. That's gonna help prop up that tail a little bit as well. Something like that, okay? And then I'm gonna finish by coming forward and securing the rest of that material to the hook shank. Just like that. Now we're gonna take that thread all the way back to the back, and we're gonna start tying in our next material. We wanna do this, I'm gonna leave myself a little bit of space between the very back feather and where my thread's gonna land there. I'm gonna come on over to my ribbing material, which is gonna be the silver oval, okay, ribbing material. I'm gonna cut off, if there's any frayed ends, I would just suggest cutting yourself into a new piece, but leaving it long. And then when I come to tie this in, I'm not gonna tie it in right at the very tip because this specific material likes to kind of come apart on you if you do that. So I'm gonna end up trimming it, but I'm gonna come in here, I'm gonna tie this on the near side of the hook, okay? So facing yourself is what near side means, right down on this edge. And I'm gonna take some thread wraps back over top of it so that it ends right where that tail begins, okay? Then I'm gonna bring my thread wraps forward a little bit. I'm gonna come in here and trim this out. This is gonna make a little bit of a bump on the underside of this body, but that's all right because we're gonna cover that all up with dubbing here shortly as well. Okay. Now I'm gonna take my thread back to where I just tied that in again. And if you go too far, you're gonna see that you're gonna tip down that tail, which we're gonna try to avoid. I've got a little material clip here on my vise, so I'm just gonna stick this ribbing material in there just so it's out of the way. And now I'm gonna go over to my black dubbing. Now this could be possum, beaver. It doesn't really matter what this dubbing is, but we do want something that's black in color and is quite wispy, okay? So we don't want really long fibers. We want it to break apart nicely. That's gonna make this dubbing noodle we're about to create a lot easier. Now, how do I create my dubbing noodle? I'm gonna pull back on my thread, okay? I'm gonna take a little bit of that dubbing, pinch it between my fingers, putting my fingers right on the thread, and I'm gonna twist in one direction. I don't wanna go both. I wanna just stay with one. Yeah, Dana's over there trying to play my favorite song. Just keep twisting it on. Grab another little piece. We're gonna keep going. We wanna try to keep the material as evenly spaced as possible so we don't have big clumps here or there. But it's all right, once we start wrapping it, if that's the case, we can always adjust it with how many wraps we put in one place with this dubbing. So I've got about a 2.5 inch dubbing noodle I'm gonna work with here. I'm gonna start taking some wraps right here. Now I want a little bit of a bushy body. It's all gonna get clamped down with that hackle, but I'm just gonna start working my way forward so I can put a little bit extra bulk than you might think. Moving it forward, can tighten that up by just spinning it again. And I'm gonna take it forward just so I can still see a little bit of my exposed thread. So I'm gonna do a half a wrap here, and I'm actually gonna, because we're using the appropriate dubbing, I can reach in there and just pull it off and it's gonna come apart. Just like that. Okay, now that my thread's back up at the head, I've got my dubbing in. The next material we're gonna go to is our rooster feather. Okay, so this is a very nice black and moderately small. You want it to be just a little oversized for the hook, meaning that if I come under here and I stretch it, I want it to be just a little wider than the hook gap. Okay, so that's what we're gonna run with here. The ones you have in your kit should be sized appropriately. I'm gonna peel a few of these feathers back off the stem so I can tie the stem in. There's an underside to the feather and there's also a top side to the feather. And you can tell because one side is dull in color and the other side is shiny. It also looks concave on the back side. We want the concave or the dull side to be pointed back down the fly. So when I tie this in, this is where the underside is pointed back down the fly. Okay, and I'm gonna lay my stem of my feather just right up on top there. And take a couple of wraps over top of it. And I'm gonna take a thread wrap in front of the stem, lock it into place, get some good thread tension in here. We don't want that to move on us once we start wrapping it. Once I feel confident that that's locked in place, give a little tug on it, make sure that stem's not moving when I do that. I know it's secure. I'm gonna come in here and trim out my stem. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take, because I have the ability on this vise to do this, I'm gonna take a quick half hitch, which just means a simple overhand knot. It's like pressing the save button on your fly. Saves your material from coming unwrapped. And I'm gonna take my bobbin and I'm gonna set it over in my bobbin cradle, so it's out of the way. From the next part, what I'm gonna be doing here is wrapping my first set of hackle, and I just would like all that stuff kind of out of the way. That's the same reason I got my ribbing here kind of out of the way. It just makes this easier. Now, I wanna do a full complete turn of my hackle before I start reaching rearward with it. So we're gonna have a little bit more bulk up at the front, and then evenly space out your wraps as you move rearward, kind of working it around that hook point until I get back to where my rib is. Now, if you left your rib on the near side of the fly towards yourself, what I want you to do is make sure that you finish your hackle on the far side of the fly. And I'm gonna lift that straight up. Okay, so this is now closer to you than it is to me. Now I'm gonna reach over here and grab my ribbing. Okay, now the direction that I just wrapped my hackle, I want to wrap my ribbing in the opposite direction. And the most important wrap is gonna be the very first one, because we need to lock in this feather with the ribbing material. So I'm gonna come over here. My first wrap is gonna slide down. So I'm using that feather, I'm bracing that rib, as you can see. Try to get my hand out of the way. Come down like this. I'm gonna secure that first wrap, and I'm nice and tight pulling on that rib, okay? And then as I keep going forward, I'm wiggling the rib back and forth to try to not trap too many of the hackle fibers. Now I can let go of that rear stem. You try to evenly space these out as you move forward. Now this is where we get finicky. If you're anything like me, you like it to look a certain way, but it's not always gonna work out that way when you're trying to work around the hackle. So just take what you get out of it. We're gonna try to evenly space those out as we move forward. I say that and I'm already unhappy with how that looks, so I'm just gonna fix that one more time. The goal is to not trap too much hackle, but the reality is with a ribbing material like this, you're gonna trap some, okay? Now I've got my rib back towards me. I'm gonna bring my thread in here, and as always, when I'm securing a material, I need to take a thread wrap behind, up and over around the hook, and then in front, behind and in front. I want you to do it twice. So we know that that rib is secure, because this rib is now the only thing holding that hackle feather in place. So it's very important that this material gets locked down nice and tight. I'm gonna do my best to pull some of that hackle back, and I'm gonna drive a few thread wraps up in front. If you have any unruly little hackle fibers like I do here, I suggest this would be a great time to come in and clip them out. Just be careful that you don't include your thread in your clipping, otherwise everything might just come undone. Now that I'm here, I'm gonna come and trim out that ribbing material, and I can get that away and set aside. I'm also gonna come back and trim out my rear hackle. Again, you're just trying to prevent any loss of extra hackle by cutting too much out. So just be careful when you cut out that rear stem. And this is what we should be left with. Looks a little unruly, that's true. But now what we're gonna do is finish it off with a nice, we're gonna use a hen cape feather today. Okay, something in that ginger blondish color is kind of what this pattern calls for. It is also appropriate to use a rooster saddle feather as well, something appropriately sized. We want the length of these fibers to be just slightly longer than the black ones, and it kind of encompasses the fly nicely. And hopefully these are all gonna be going, pointing rearward and back down the fly. So what I've done is I've kind of exposed the very tip of this feather. I'm gonna try to get it all pulled back and out of the way. So when I tie it in, I'm gonna tie it in just like this in that space I've created, okay? Now I'm gonna come in here, just like how I tied in my other hackle feather, get a good gathering wrap, secure it down. I'm gonna take my thread right up against where I left that ribbing and that other hackle, because that's where I want my wraps to start. I'm gonna make sure I get a wrap underneath the stem as well. Trying not to trap any extra feather in there. And once I do that, again, I'm gonna half hitch to save my work. I'm just gonna use my half hitch tool this time, now that I got a bunch of stuff up at the head. And then I'm gonna go and get my thread out of the way once again. Now, before I do anything else, I wanna come in here and trim out the very tip. And if you've got a pair of hackle pliers handy, it can definitely be advantageous when you start making your wraps here. I'm gonna try to do it without. And all I'm gonna do is create a nice collar for this fly, and I'm trying to pull those fibers rearward as I wrap. So they're not always gonna wanna go that direction, and we can control some of that with our thread once we get this tied in. But we do wanna try to pull back like this as I'm making a wrap forward. I'm only gonna do 2 to 3 turns max here at the head. I don't wanna overdo it with all this front hackle. Then I'm gonna bring my thread back in. I'm gonna take a gathering wrap behind the stem and in front, just like we did before, okay? So behind in front, behind in front. I'm gonna do it one more time. Behind and in front. Again, trying to just work around all those extra little pieces of the feather. Now, before I do anything else, again, looks pretty unruly at this moment. I promise you it's gonna get better. I'm gonna pull all this material back with my fingers, and I'm gonna drive a nice thread base in right at the head. And I'm gonna actually take some thread wraps back onto the hackle that I just put in. So I do wanna have that hackle start going rearward. So I basically made a nice ramp with my thread. You can already see it's wanting to point back down the fly. Now, before I trim out my hackle, I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna half hitch this. This is gonna be my finishing knot. I will come back with some resin in a moment, but I'm gonna do this twice, 2 wraps around my tool, let it slide off. You could also whip finish this. I just find it a little easier on these smaller flies to do it this way. Then I'm gonna come in here, get a good view of just that stem. Try not to cut out any other material if you can. We're gonna get a good look at this fly kind of for the first time and what it's gonna look like, which looks pretty good. If you need to make any extra little adjustments here, this would be the time. I also like to come at it with a little bit of Velcro, and it just helps spread out the feather. If any of the fibers are kind of grabbing onto each other, it opens it up. And even adding a little moisture to your fingers, simulating the water and being able to see what it's gonna look like coming back down and when it's in the water itself. And if you haven't already, do your last knot. I'm gonna do one more since I added a couple wraps. I'm gonna add a little bit of resin to this. And we're gonna call it good on this fly. Tonight I'm using some Bone Dry by Solarez. This is a brush on UV resin. It's gonna come in here and put just the smallest dab with the brush right on the head wraps that I did there. Cure it with my light. Give it a few seconds to cure. And there we are. Okay, now we got a good look at this, guys. There it is. That is your Kate McLaren Wet Fly. What it's imitating, nobody always knows in each watershed what it's doing, but it's a very effective fly that works. I encourage you to tie up all the ones you have in your kit. If you have our kits, put them in your box and give them a try on a slow day next time when you don't know what else is working. All right, guys, I want to thank you again for joining us. This has been another quick tie. Again, my name is Tim Hepworth here with Fly Fishing Bow Reel Outfitters and Thursday Night Live Fly Tying. Until next week when we see you again, don't forget, keep your scissors steady, your resin ready, and your flies looking deadly.